Удобные исторические теории. Простые, стройные, известные каждому со школы. Будут опровергнуты. Забытая история.
3:07 p.m. local time. Radio station, Moscow is speaking, 94.8. Good afternoon. Evgenia Volgina is your host. This is the program Forgotten History. In our studio, we have Gleb Nosovsky, a mathematician, associate professor of the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics of Moscow State University, and co-author of the new chronology of Fomenko Nosovsky. Gleb Vladimirovich, hello.
Hello.
7373948 is the number of the live broadcast by code 8495. Text messages +7925 888 Twitter, GOVORIT MSK, and our website, govoritmoskva.ru. I suppose today we will discuss the main milestones of history from the perspective of the new chronology. A similar topic was discussed last week, but your colleague, Mr. Katovich, spoke briefly and broadly. I assume today you want to talk about everything in more detail?
Not so much in more detail, but I would like to shed light on some points that Boris Katovich did not cover. He perfectly outlined the general framework without delving into details, otherwise he simply wouldn't have had time. But, as I imagine, many people would like to think that something is indeed proven in the new chronology, but much is simply made up. The critical part is generally correct. But as for the reconstruction, Anatoly Fomenko and I are not right. We made it all up, and our reconstruction actually does not follow from the new chronology. In my experience, many people try to hide behind such views in order to retain the right to believe in the history they are accustomed to believing.
Let's take some event.
Therefore, I want to start by dotting the I's, and explaining what is proven in the new chronology and what is conjecture. Because, of course, any historical reconstruction contains some conjecture. I would like to start with what is specifically proven and what is specifically conjecture. Because Boris Katovich has already talked about the general reconstruction, let's start with the basics. What is proven? The new chronology, using mathematical, statistical, and astronomical methods, has demonstrated that all histories of various countries, civilizations, states, actually, if viewed from the present to the past, starting from a certain point, merge and represent the same thing.
Absolutely all, you say?
Absolutely all.
Why?
This is a formal result obtained by mathematical and statistical methods. This means that all histories up to a certain boundary of the 16th and 17th centuries actually trace back to a common source and express the same thing in different words, albeit slightly differently illuminated. This is a formal mathematical statistical result of comparing various chronicles present in our global history. I repeat once again, this is a formal result. The formal result is that all historical dynasties, histories of one country, another country, a third country, actually, not too long ago in the past, before the provisional 16th and 17th centuries, merge and represent one history.
Why specifically the 16th and 17th centuries?
That's the answer. Why? I don't know. Because that's how it turned out. Why is 2 times 2 4 and not 5?
Interesting. Why not the 15th or 10th century?
Because that's what the calculations show.
Calculations. Alright. What algorithms do you use for these calculations?
We use a variety of algorithms. This is detailed in the books. The specific mathematical statistical and empirical statistical models we use are elaborated in detail in the books. And I won't discuss it here because this is not the place to present scientific results. For that, we need a blackboard and more time than is allotted here. It is detailed there. Right now, I'm just presenting the result. This result is formal. I would like to emphasize it once again. We have chronological tables, compiled in the 17th century, Blair's chronological tables and others, in which a huge amount of supposedly completely different chronological sequences is presented. Ancient Persia, ancient Egypt, Rome, England, France, and everything else. All these historical and dynastic streams, starting from a certain point, roughly speaking, from plus or minus 1600, although there are deviations, actually reflect the same events in some capital. A formal consequence of this is a conclusion drawn from many years of research and very extensive calculations using various independent methods, elaborated in books and articles. The conclusion is that, actually, starting approximately from 1600, our history is incorrect. One can vividly imagine the following situation. We are sitting in a room and looking at the opposite wall, where there is a window. We see the room we are sitting in and perceive that there is something far beyond the window. We have the impression that our gaze extends far beyond. In reality, this window is painted on the wall, and we only have the impression that we see not only the room but also what is beyond the window.
Examples.
With the help of this vivid image, I want to explain what our history actually is. We are in the present time. The length of this room extends approximately until the beginning of the 17th century, until 1600, and at the beginning of the 17th century, there is this wall with a painted window, through which, as it seems to us, we peer into the past and see what was before the beginning of the 17th century. However, this picture is painted. And until the beginning of the 17th century, we more or less see what really happened. We see reality. At the beginning of the 17th century, there is a certain barrier. By the way, Morozov also tried to step through documents into the past. He had a special methodology. He tried to examine documents based on previous documents to pull out the entire chain and see how far we can reliably go into the past step by step. His conclusion was exactly the same. In terms of documentary evidence, we can only progress until the beginning of the 17th century. Beyond that, the situation changes sharply, something completely different, questionable, and incomprehensible begins. It is logical that the further back into the past, the less information we have, but if it were natural, the decline would be smooth. That is, looking into the past, we would see less and less of what really happened there, and this decrease would be smooth. However, it is not smooth, it is abrupt, and the leap occurs at the beginning of the 17th century. If we open any textbook, that's when the modern era begins. Such a major periodization of our history is correct. Essentially, if we open a textbook of world history, we will see that there was ancient history, then antiquity, then there was the Middle Ages after the adoption of Christianity. Then in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the Reformation began, leading into the Renaissance.
And then, starting from the 17th century, the modern era began, in which we live today.
This modern era is the room in which we sit and which we see, and everything before that is the painted window. Again, this is a formal result obtained by us and Morozov using various parameters. We studied charters, signs of authenticity, manuscripts, everything sharply declines. The number of autographs and originals sharply declines. It is precisely at this time that handwriting becomes unreadable, and so on. Some strange, forgotten alphabets emerge. That's the situation.
Gleb Vladimirovich, I apologize. Let's use an example.
I will talk about this important topic again.
In addition, we have a methodology, very complex in terms of calculations and quite advanced. These are relation matrices that allow us to break down any dynastic history into segments, into nested chronicles, and see what it is made of, how it is assembled, and which periods reflect genuine history, and which periods are actually patched together from different duplicates. We constructed a relation matrix for a very large number of dynastic streams, and all results without exception show that genuine dynastic history begins from the beginning of the 17th century. Before that, there are chronological patches, overlays, duplicates, and so on. If we look at our history, we will see that in the early 17th century, almost all European royal dynasties changed. In our history, there is a certain boundary, the beginning of the 17th century, which coincides with the time of troubles in Russia when Russian history underwent a sudden change. Even if you go to the movies, just watch any fictional film, and if it's a film about the modern era, the 17th and 18th centuries, you will see a lot of details there, clothing, some setting, and so on. Watch any film related to the 16th century or earlier. You will see bare walls, dark scenes, meaning consultants simply don't always know the details. The number of details somehow sharply decreases. Some kind of medieval period not quite understandable to us begins. It even shows in artistic works. This is around the year 1600, the time of troubles in Russia, the beginning of the modern era. This is the right boundary of that chronological segment that needs to be reconstructed and restored. Using various methods, it needs to be brought into line with modern scientific understanding.
And now let's look at the left boundary of this segment.
Actually, from which moment should we start reconstructing history? This question is also answered by the new chronology, also formally through the obtained system of datings. The earliest, more or less continuous, except for individual, very rare dates, are the datings of the 12th century.
This is the era of Christ in the new chronology.
So, these are not speculations. This is purely the formal result of the new chronology, which states that the known written history unfolded from the middle of the 12th century to our time, but until the beginning of the 17th century, it is distorted. That is, it has a distorted segment from the 12th century to the beginning of the 17th century, and it is more or less chronological but not historical because there are historical errors in the 17th and 18th centuries.
In reality, entire states were deliberately forgotten.
For example, the Moscow Tartary in Siberia, the largest state in the world in the 18th century, about which we know nothing. In fact, history, and how we perceive it, only becomes accurate from the 19th century onwards. But the chronology, when certain events occurred, becomes correct from the beginning of the 17th century. This is a proven formal result of the new chronology.
I want to talk about how to reconstruct history from the 12th to the beginning of the 17th century.
Give us examples. In other words, what is the usual understanding of certain events for us, and what events, in your opinion, happened completely differently?
Yes, and then I will answer the questions. Let's see what the period before the modern era looks like in the history we know. We see that the modern era begins in the 17th century.
Here we have no questions for historians. Starting from the 17th century, it is chronologically correctly presented in history textbooks, although there are huge historical errors there. If we take a broad view of the history we are used to, before the beginning of the 17th century, it's some ancient epic, ancient Egypt, ancient China, ancient civilizations. And then more or less detailed ancient histories begin. This is ancient Rome, in fact, the antiquity that preceded the acceptance of Christianity. The boundary between antiquity and ancient times is blurred. But antiquity ends quite clearly in the 4th century with the adoption of Christianity, and the Christian Middle Ages begin.
I will leave the East aside for now.
The history of the East was written late, and I will tell you about it a little later. Let's take the Mediterranean, Europe, Russia, Egypt, North Africa, the part around the Mediterranean Sea. Before the 4th century, it's antiquity. In the 4th century, with the adoption of Christianity, the Christian Middle Ages begin, which from the late 15th to 16th century transition into the era of the Reformation and then the Renaissance of the New Rome. Such milestones: the transition from antiquity to the Christian Middle Ages, the adoption of Christianity in the 4th century. In the new chronology, this is the 14th century of the Common Era. This is also a formal result. Now, we may set this point. So, according to the new chronology, the Christian Middle Ages begin in the second half of the 14th century, closer to the end. All of the Christian Middle Ages actually fit into a period of approximately 100 years, from the late 14th to the end of the 15th century, when the era of the Reformation and Renaissance began. Here we have no chronological discrepancies. So, the era of the Christian Middle Ages is greatly compressed, just 100 years. This includes all the ecumenical councils, the development of the Christian Church as dominant, Byzantium, disputes between iconoclasts and iconodules, and so on. This all happened from the late 14th century until the fall of Constantinople in 1453.
Does it all geographically align or not?
Geographically, the world capital at that time is formally located in Constantinople. This is what corresponds to Byzantium and the Ottoman conquest in our perceptions. That's what essentially altogether happened in the 15th century. The peak of Byzantium and the beginning of the Ottoman conquest is the Christian Middle Ages. In the new chronology, antiquity spans from the 12th to the end of the 14th century. That's 200 years. This period encompasses everything we envision as antiquity. It includes ancient Rome, the creation of the Roman Empire, and so forth. Practically all pre-Christian monuments that stand in museums today, according to the new chronology, belong to the period from the 12th to the end of the 14th century.
Let's look at Egypt.
There are many astronomical datings there. These datings show that Egypt is certainly not just a tomb. It is clear that Egypt existed both later and earlier. Monumental constructions in Egypt, the tombs of kings in the Valley of the Kings, temples. The pyramids do not have dating elements, but they are indirectly dated by temples, by royal tombs. Astronomical datings range from the 10th to the 14th century, so this is antiquity and even slightly intrudes into an era that is very poorly known to us. Again, I repeat, the era of Christ is the 12th century. Egyptian datings start as early as the 10th century, albeit rarely. That is, indeed, as it was believed that Egypt was the most ancient country, so it remains.
Egypt is the most ancient country.
Agriculture originated there. The first state was formed there. By the way, all civilizations are agricultural precisely because agriculture arose in Egypt. As we imagine, this happened because although the Nile Valley is exceptionally fertile, it is squeezed from both sides by completely barren desert and is flooded with water for 4 months a year. Therefore, people who ended up in that confined space, and reproduced there, were forced to engage in some kind of gathering and storing their provisions. They had to find a way to survive for 4 months. They couldn't hunt or do anything else, so they were compelled to practice agriculture.
This is Gleb Nosovsky, co-author of The New Chronology of Fomenko Nosovsky, mathematician, associate professor of the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics of Moscow State University. Your questions, dear listeners, 7373-948 is the number of the live broadcast. Text messages, +7 925 888 8948. Gleb Nosovsky will answer your questions after news.
Забытая история.
In the Forgotten History today, Gleb Nosovsky talks about the major milestones of human history according to the new chronology. As promised, 7373-948 is the number of the live broadcast. We're starting to take your calls. Dear listeners, good afternoon. What's your name?
I saw a TV show with revisionist scientists. Can you please tell me, do they come to their conclusions on their own or rely on your research?
It depends on who. There are many different ones.
Won't you answer?
I have to hear some names.
Then answer the 163rd. What about monarch dynasties? Are their datings correct?
I just talked about monarch dynasties and not necessarily monarchs, but various rulers.
There are many different dynasties. All of them have been studied extensively, and I have already formulated the resulting outcome. In fact, all these dynasties are multi-layered, meaning chronologically incorrect, up to various margins, but mainly, as a rule, approximately up to the year 1600.
7373948 is the number of the live broadcast. I'm listening to you. Hello, what's your name?
I would like to ask Gleb Nosovsky a question.
Please, go ahead. What's your name?
Alexander Dolgov.
Hello, Alexander.
Hello, Gleb Vladimirovich. I am your admirer, and here we have many of your like-minded people. I track all your detractors who want to expose you.
What's your specific question?
A specific question. Why do all your main exposers, whom I've heard, rely on Arabic sources, but not on European ones, like Orbinet?
It's difficult for me to answer why they rely on certain sources. We also closely monitor our critics and try to extract something useful from their criticism. But to be honest, very little is filtered out.
7373948 is the number of the live broadcast. Listening to you. Hello.
Hello.
What's your name?
My name is Nikolai. Please, list the reference points on your timeline.
Thank you for your question. I was just about to do that.
So, ancient Egypt, the dawn of civilization, the emergence of agriculture, the emergence of science in the form of astronomy, which served agriculture. Because from the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, we have, albeit rare, but specifically ancient Egyptian datings. History begins to come into our field of view precisely from the 12th century.
You talked about this in the first half hour. Let's specifically discuss the key points.
The next key point, located at the beginning, is the era of Christ, the 12th century. This is his life, crucifixion, then the Crusades, then the collapse of the empire, of which he was emperor for 3 years. The 13th century is turmoil, and the 14th century is the restoration of this empire, but with a new capital. I remind you that the capital of Christ is Jerusalem, also known as Yeros. This city is on the Asian side of the Bosporus, near its mouth into the Black Sea. It still stands in ruins. It was there that the gospel events took place, and next to this city is the highest mountain of the Bosporus, Beykoz, also known as Golgotha, where the symbolic tomb of Jesus is located, the place of the crucifixion of Christ. Starting from the 12th century, from this key point, our history is essentially the history of one royal family called the Holy Family.
Christ belonged to this family.
It is this family that created our civilization. We don't know what was before that. There may have been other royal families, but it was precisely this royal family that emerged from the darkness of antiquity.
We see it from the era of Christ, and subsequently, it is this family that creates our civilization.
Coming to Russia, its representatives in the 14th century restore the empire with a new center in Vladimir Suzdal, Russia. This is the ancient Rome. The era of ancient Rome is the first half of the 14th century, a relatively short era. During this time, Eurasia was conquered, essentially colonized. Of course, old places were conquered as well, the coasts of the Black and Mediterranean Seas, where there was some civilization, but generally the inner parts of Eurasia were colonized. Major cities were built in a ring around Vladimir, which later turned into major European capitals, and the Eurasian civilization was created. Everything was connected by communication routes from Japan to England. At the end of the 14th century, there is a sharp turning point in the empire. The next important milestone, which I mentioned, is the adoption of Christianity, the transition from antiquity to Christian medieval times. It is very important to understand that this was Christian antiquity, that from Christ came two branches of Christianity: royal Christianity, the Christianity of his relatives, who in the 13th–14th centuries created this empire and considered themselves gods.
They too were Christians.
And there was Christianity of his disciples, apostles, apostolic Christianity, which came into conflict with royal Christianity. Persecutions of Christians began, which was persecutions of apostolic Christianity by royal Christians. This is the first half of the 14th century.
Remember?
Emperors torture Christian martyrs, feed them to beasts in circuses. So, this is precisely the era of discord. At first, these two branches of Christianity were friendly. Then in the 14th century, they fell out, and the dominant royal Christianity, represented by the relatives of Christ who led the empire and professed royal Christianity, began to persecute apostolic Christians.
Can you mention specific names?
History has multiplied, so their names have also multiplied. In Roman history, these are Aurelian, Diocletian, Maximian. In Russian history, these are Ivan Kalitta, Simeon the Proud, Ivan the Fair.
These are the emperors of the empire.
They also exist in a huge number of duplicates. I just named two streams. Then the adoption of apostolic Christianity takes place, the Battle of Kulikovo, about which I talked in great detail on 2 shows, and I won't repeat it. Listen about the Battle of Kulikovo, the invention of cannons by Sergius of Radonesh, the victory of apostolic Christianity over royal one, and the expulsion of the royal family, the Holy Family. They went to the east and created all this mysterious ancient Orient that we perceive today as very ancient. In fact, it is ancient because they took ancient ideas there, ancient customs that we have already forgotten, and they took them there. So, on the one hand, it is ancient, but in terms of time, they appeared much later. All this East was created by this royal family, the Holy Family, in the 15th to 16th centuries after the Battle of Kulikovo, after the royal Christians left there. In the 17th century, they went to China and created the Chinese Empire. A book called The Last Journey of the Holy Family should be coming out soon. In Russia, which was the capital of the world at that time, Christianity was adopted at the end of the 14th century. As we know, Constantine the Great, upon accepting Christianity, moved the capital. In fact, it was so. Dmitry Donskoy, also known as Constantine the Great, upon adopting apostolic Christianity, moved the capital from Vladimir Suzdal, Russia, from ancient Rome, back to the shores of the Bosporus, to the place of Christ's crucifixion. And near Yeros, near Jerusalem, but on the other side of the Bosporus, he built the city of Constantinople. The emergence of Constantinople and Byzantium is actually a very short period of luxurious Byzantine history. It's only 60 years. During this time, they built a lot, built such a magnificent city. However, by moving the capital from Russia, he actually made a mistake of leaving the main military forces in Russia. Although the Tsar and the boyars left, the main military forces remained in Russia. And after 50 years, this led to another wave of conquest coming from Russia. They swept the capital, and the remnants of the old boyars fled and founded Rome in Italy. They began a renaissance and invented this history. Demagogically, of course, it was a brilliant move. Sitting in Italy, they portrayed Italy as the center of ancient Rome. They were ancient Romans and created ancient Rome in Russia. Then they moved to Constantinople, built it, and when they were expelled from there, they entrenched themselves in Italy, in the Vatican. Understanding that they couldn't fight the new forces, feeling aggrieved because the people who expelled them were of lower nobility, they invented ideological weapons. They started the Reformation, claiming that there was an ancient Rome in antiquity, Let's restore it. Let's restore the forgotten antiquity.
If it was as you describe, how did it spread to the whole world?
It spread to the whole world after the second wave of conquest, also known as the Ottoman conquest. It was the Russo-Turkish Empire.
In fact, it was Russian troops that came out of Russia. It was already at the end of the 19th century that they came up with the idea that the Ottomans came from Asia Minor. Even Karamzin wrote that they came out of Russia, even Gibbon wrote about it.
These troops came out of Russia and created this two-headed empire with capitals in Istanbul and Moscow.
They were related dynasties. It was one empire with two capitals,
in Moscow and Istanbul. They conquered the world, but in Italy there were the descendants of the old boyars who fled from Constantinople.
7373-9948 is the number of the live broadcast. Listening to you. Hello.
Hello.
What's your name?
Mihail, Moscow. I have 2 questions. The first question is, I get the impression that your early research on narrative texts served as the basis for creating the modern anti-plagiarism program. And the second question is, what do you think about the ideas promoted by someone named Sklyarov in his films regarding the existence of some ancient civilization with quite significant technological capabilities?
I understand. I'll answer the question. Regarding plagiarism, this is a method of author's invariant, which indeed allows finding plagiarism in some cases. In particular, when applied to Sholohov's books, it was found that most of the book, And Quiet Flows the Dawn, was written by Kryukiv. This is the work of Anatoly Fomenko and his parents. It allows detecting plagiarism.
In particular, a very important result related to history was obtained.
The well-known history by Lomonosov, which is printed nowadays, was not actually written by Lomonosov, because it was published after his death by his enemy Muller.
Muller was Lomonosov's opponent.
After Lomonosov's death, his papers were given to Muller, and it was Muller who printed this history. The author's invariant shows that it was he who wrote it on behalf of Lomonosov.
Lomonosov didn't write it.
As for ancient civilizations,
it would be very interesting to know what Lomonosov wrote, but we don't know.
The question about ancient civilizations.
What question?
The question was from a listener about the existence of ancient civilizations.
There was a question about the invariant, and the second question?
The second question was about ancient civilizations.
All ancient civilizations that left written monuments that have reached us date back to the 12th century.
I've already talked about this in detail.
These are all Christian civilizations, including Eastern ones.
Sergei, in Europe, in the 13th century, a huge number of very large cathedrals were built. And in our empire, there are tiny churches from the 16th century. How does this correlate?
Wonderful question. By inventing ideological weapons, they also invented advertising.
You read that Western cathedrals were built in the 13th century.
However, if you read more specialized sources, you will see that they were actually completed in the 17th, 18th centuries.
And in the 13th century, you're lucky if they were being built at all. Do you know that these cathedrals were built over 100, 200, 300 years?
If we look at prints from the 16th century, for example, St. Stephen's Cathedral, it's some unfinished building. All these huge cyclopean cathedrals, everything magnificent that we see. In fact, the whole of Europe was built after the collapse of the empire, starting from the 17th century when they got money. Before that, they sent all the money to the center, to Russia, and they simply had nothing to build all this with. By building it in the 17th, 18th centuries, they attributed the beginning of construction to the 13th, 14th centuries. This is very well seen in Italy. There are many Italian zodiacs that show that overall Italian medieval history is falsified. The era of the 13th, 14th centuries, which they depict on paper, is actually from the late 15th to the 17th century.
Lisa asks, According to your chronology, in what century was the Church of the Intercession on the Nile built?
We haven't looked into the dating of the Church of the Intercession on the Nile, but it's most likely from antiquity, the 14th–15th centuries.
Rakes asks, how does your theory determine the origins of Islam and Judaism?
I just want to note that don't think that the Vladimir and Suzdal cathedrals are in the same condition as they were built. They have been substantially altered.
But we can still see some remnants of their original appearance.
Rakes, how does your theory determine the origins of Islam and Judaism? You say there were Christians.
I briefly talked about this last time.
The history of religion is a fascinating topic. Let me briefly tell you about it again. So, the 12th century, Christ, the emergence of two branches of Christianity, royal and apostolic. Initially, they went hand in hand, fought together in the Crusades. They conquered all, built an empire. But the royal Christians, relatives of Christ, who had their imperial cemetery in Egypt, still viewed Christianity differently than the apostolic Christianity familiar to us today, the Christianity of Christ's disciples. They began persecuting Christians, and then apostolic Christianity came to power. So far only Christianity exists, there are no other religions.
The end of the 14th century.
In the 15th century, royal Christianity goes to the east and creates Buddhism, Hinduism, Krishnaism, and so on. Confucianism is the same, it's also them. In the 15th century, in apostolic Christianity, the Ottoman movement emerges.
This is a movement within the framework of apostolic Christianity.
It's ascetic due to the plague, and so on. In the 15th century, an ascetic stream first appears in apostolic Christianity.
The early Christianity, even apostolic, was not ascetic.
If you look at old Christian sources, you will see that the first Christians were not ascetic in the sense it is now. An ascetic stream appears, we call it Ottoman, but most likely, it's Rusma. It doesn't matter, it came from Russia. It was within apostolic Christianity. Ottoman is a conditional name. Don't think it's Muslim in the modern sense. It was as Muslim as it was Orthodox. This ascetic movement in apostolic Christianity exists until the end of the 15th century. Again, it's one, there's nothing else. In the year 7000 from Adam or in 1492 of the Common Era, when they awaited the end of the world, there was a split when people began to doubt the truth of apostolic Christianity. Many different teachings arose, and it was at this time that Judaism appeared, as an attempt to reconstruct ancient royal Christianity. The ancient gospel Jews of Christ's time are the royal family, the same holy family. Judaism, which arose after 1492, is an attempt at reconstruction, but within Ottoman frameworks. It has nothing to do with ancient Judaism, but the name is borrowed from there. At the same time, Protestantism arises, then Catholicism, and so on. All these religions arise after 1492, and there's a complex history there, which I don't want to dwell on. The only thing I want to say is that present-day Islam and Orthodoxy diverged into two branches in the 17th century. In the 16th century, it was still one Christian religion with the veneration of Muhammad as a great saint.
7373948 is the number of the live broadcast. We're listening to you. Hello.
Hello, Vladimir from Moscow. I have a question for Nosovsky. Tell me, Nosovsky, you used to belong to the Rogoshki Old Believers, right? And you were excommunicated from the church. Is it true?
This question is not related to history.
Visit our website, Russian Faith, and we'll chat there. Yes, I am an old believer, but I don't go to Rogoshki. I go to Paveletsky, to the ancient Orthodox Church.
7373948 is the number of the live broadcast. Please ask questions on the topic. Dear listeners, hello, what's your name?
Good afternoon, my name is Vitaly.
Vitaly, go ahead.
According to your chronology, when did the first humans, Adam and Eve, appear? They say that once upon a time there was a first woman. When did Homo sapiens appear?
Actually, it's a very interesting question. It's not directly related to the new chronology, but it's relevant to genetics. It's a very interesting question.
Listen to the first broadcasts where I talked about.
Briefly please, in case someone didn't listen.
This is not directly related to the new chronology, but according to modern genetic research, our impression is that the modern hypothetical Adam and Eve, that is, the man from whom the white race originated, I emphasize, the white race, not black or yellow, but white, most likely lived somewhere after the eruption of 532 AD.
1532?
No, I'm sorry, year 532.
So, what was before that?
Before that, there were some people, but almost all of them perished during that eruption. I want to reiterate that there's a purely formal mathematical result that says, if a population lives for some time, then after a finite time, with probability 1, only descendants of one individual remain. Therefore, according to probability theory, there is always some Adam. It's a complex and interesting scientific question. So, I've answered you. Most likely, after 532 AD.
Rakes asks, how does your theory explain the emergence of polytheism, idolatry, worship of various totems among the indigenous peoples of North and South America, and the absence of hints of Christianity in America?
Regarding the absence of hints of Christianity in America, they went to America in the 15th century. What do you mean? If you mean the Maya and Aztec civilizations, there are hints of Christianity there. If you mean the Native Americans of North America leading a wild lifestyle, then I'm only talking about civilized peoples. Again, I constantly repeat that the new chronology only concerns civilized peoples who have writing. There are many other very good peoples, but the new chronology does not concern them.
It means that you are dealing with a certain civilization where there is writing, and you are not dealing with other civilizations. Okay, then please answer 003. Please specify where exactly in Karamzin it is written that the Ottoman conquest came from Russia. Ildar asks.
Do you want me to recite the specific page for you?
We have references in our books.
It's in History of the Russian State.
One just needs to reread it. 7373948.
In the footnotes, keep in mind that in Karamzin's history, the most valuable parts are the footnotes.
The footnotes are the most valuable. Okay, we have another 40 seconds. Hello?
Hello, my name is Georgie.
Georgie, please go ahead with your question.
Could you please explain, do you believe the aim of the new chronology is to destroy the foundation, that is Christianity, and to foster a pagan sect in Russia, a new religion? What is your opinion?
A new religion and sect of new chronologists? I don't understand your question, to be honest.
The listener disconnected. 7373948. Then we'll hear from you. Hello?
Hello.
Hello, please keep it brief.
In the Soviet Union, there were also questions about Sholohov's plagiarism. But specialists proved that it was all lies, that Sholohov did write it. Tell me, how would you characterize today's Western civilization?
How would you characterize Western civilization, briefly?
No, I can't do it in 2 seconds.
Modern civilization is the development of the same ancient empire. It's a natural progression, a struggle of elites, and so on. It's a very interesting subject.
Read our book, God of War.
Gleb Nosovsky, mathematician, associate professor at the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics of Moscow State University, has talked about the new chronology. Thank you, Gleb Vladimirovich.
Thank you.